The Tomb Raider remasters have recently been released, and I'm sure the entire fandom has been ablaze to jump back into the 3 classic games to see how things look and relive the old glory days. But for me, I knew the real treat for these remasters wasn't really gonna be the 3 main games by Core Design. They're kind of just bonuses for me, honestly. For me, the main treat was always going to be the expansions: Unfinished Business, The Golden Mask, and The Lost Artifact. And you might be thinking, that's because I must have never played them before. But that's not really the case. Well, if I've played the expansions already, what's so great about them that I'm far more excited to play them than the longer, more narratively fleshed out main 3 adventures?
Hi, I'm Lara Croft, and I'm here to tell you all about my new...
The games we love the most often have a bias that goes back to our childhood. So to take you back to mine for a minute, my very first experience with Tomb Raider was actually a simultaneous mix of Tomb Raider 2 and Tomb Raider 3. Specifically, my cousins had gotten a hold of Tomb Raider 3, the full game. Meanwhile, back at my house, we had first gotten the Great Wall demo for Tomb Raider 2. The only thing remotely similar to Tomb Raider which I'd played beforehand would have been a version of the original Prince of Persia. But Tomb Raider 2 was just on another level of graphical fidelity and possibilities. I'd spend hours just admiring the simplest things, from how fluidly Lara's hair blew in the wind, to how terrifying it was to have a tiger jump out at me. We'd sometimes amuse ourselves by throwing Lara off a high cliff, cackling every time she screamed and broke her legs. It, was a bit sadistic, actually. That Great Wall demo probably lasted me a few months before I simply craved being able to run further down past that corridor with the slicing blades. And so one fateful day, the adults of the house saw fit to get us a full Lara Croft game, and so it was that we obtained Tomb Raider 2, the Gold Edition. I was so excited to open the case and pop the disc into the CD drive that I didn't even notice that there were actually 2 blue CDs, or that the one I had actually picked up was marked Disc 2. I actually happen to have that scratched up old CD right here, and it still works. The game booted up and I heard the iconic Tomb Raider 2 theme for the first time. Playing over a background that showed a newspaper clipping that said a Cold War was coming. Did any of this mean anything to me? Nope, it was a new game, and that's all that mattered. I was unceremoniously dropped in the frigid waters of the Cold War. My swimming skills being passable, I swam forward, ready to see the wonderful new world that awaited me, when suddenly... So in situations like these, what 7 or 8-year-old me would do is hit the escape key to pause the game and run away from the computer for a good 2 minutes. But I couldn't really ask any adults for help since they didn't know how to work a video game, and my brother wasn't always available, nor was it his job to bail me out of my silly scaredy cat problems. So naturally, I'd have to go back to the computer and swim Lara to the closest, safest point, which I couldn't find for the longest time because I was terrified and couldn't think straight. When I finally managed to find salvation on this little white platform, I must have breathed a sigh of relief, hearing the familiar sound of the helicopter flying overhead. The ordeal was over, but the trauma had been done. From that day onward, for many years, I always dreaded pressing New Game in Tomb Raider 2 Gold. And honestly, this is the start of why the Gold games are some of my most memorable experiences with Tomb Raider. The sheer stones to just drop a new player into the water with a shark is unparalleled. The Golden Mask held a lot of first times for me. But it wasn't long after I had explored some of the land and killed some of the wild cats there that we realized there was another disc to put in and install. And so began my concurrent campaigns through both the Golden Mask and the Dagger of Shearin. But in going through the levels of Tomb Raider 2, even as a kid, I felt there was something inherently different between it and Tomb Raider 2 Gold. Not just the obvious change in scenery or the different textures on the enemies, but a sense of pace and variety that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Tomb Raider 2 was longer, felt more methodical, more spaced out, and mentally consuming, like serious business. But Tomb Raider 2 Gold felt like consistently engaging in event after event, almost unrelenting in a way, requiring the same kind of explorative attitude but in a less demanding form. It was hard to put into words, and it would be years before I truly understood what this difference was, or why it even existed. Yo, I love how dark and blue it is. That's beautiful. Wow. Wow.
You can tell that this was made by a different team, like TombRaider gold packs. Like, they're very different in terms of level design.
The core guys were swearing at me so much for making them so hard and putting so much stuff in them.
The expansion games are levels made after their respective main installments. Being worked on by a different team is reason enough for the levels to be different. They'd have had the opportunity to work with the tools to make something that likely benefited from past experience and avoided past problems. Only having to create 4 to 6 levels maximum is already a lesser weight, even though it fell on fewer shoulders. That said, 3 months for something like 3 people to craft a narrative and a handful of levels to go along with it is no simple task, even with the required tools already available. The impressive Philip Campbell, being the level designer, he's given insight as to his level design process in discussions that can be heard in streams on Tomb of Ashes channel, and I strongly recommend you check those streams out for some inside information on how these levels, along with various others throughout the series, came to be. It's the combination of Phil and Kris Renkewitz, Rebecca Shearin's beautiful texture work, Richard Flower's additional programming, and Gary LaRochelle's help in modeling new 3D shapes that allowed these small, extremely creative mini adventures to really stand out apart from their core counterparts. But now, let's go through all the ways that I've personally noticed as to why the experience of going through these levels really smack me in the face compared to the main games.
Still, it is the taking part which counts.
So let's start with the player inventory in these games. The expansions had the exciting task of fitting all of Lara's main game elements into a tighter game, and with that means giving the player all the guns and ammo that were previously distributed over the course of over a dozen levels. New guns are part of the thrill of doing combat in these games. To compare their availability in the different games directly, in Tomb Raider 1 you get all your weapons over the span of 12 levels. In Unfinished Business, they're all available in the first level. In Tomb Raider 2, it takes 3 levels to acquire 3 new guns. In The Golden Mask, it takes 1 level to acquire 4. In Tomb Raider 3, the first level will net you only the shotgun. In The Lost Artifact, the first level will again net you 4 new guns. Nearly every level offers the player an opportunity to acquire multiple guns. It's an understatedly good design principle to have in these cases, and it's comforting to feel like no matter how behind you are on resources, every level will accommodate the player's inventory for the challenge they're about to face, making each level very replayable on its own. It's guns and ammo throughout, to the point where in a game like Unfinished Business, I kinda felt like I was getting too much ammo. That's not to say that the ammo is super easy to acquire across all of the expansions, or that they're not worth looking for. You still need to explore for them, and if you don't, you may find yourself lacking in games like The Golden Mask and The Lost Artifact. So rest assured that your attempts to explore won't go unrewarded with underwhelming results in these games, which honestly kind of happens more than I'd like in the main games.
Really, secretly, I designed them all to be played from no inventory right at the start, because other than guns and ammo, there wasn't a lot of pickups. It really was kind of dull when you had everything and then you went into a level, whereas I like to put them all in very creative places.
So we're in the Atlantean stronghold, and you can imagine my surprise when this was the first level that the expansion dropped you into. Now, we always knew that this level was intended to be played first, but one of the other big reasons as to why I was so excited for the expansions is this exact phenomenon where situations like this can be fixed in the remasters, and it offers a different experience with a new challenge because we're maining the pistols against an insurmountable set of odds. So here we are. I'm excited.
You can't bump off me and my brood so easy, Lara.
With all this said about how much ammo the games give you, you can expect that Tomb Raider games aren't just handing out ammo for free for no reason. Tomb Raider 1 is really the only game in the classic trilogy that starts the player off in a light introductory way. Tomb Raider 2, Tomb Raider 3, and the expansions have no such chill. The expansions manage to give the player more than their fair share of combat challenges in the small space of time that they occupy. Since Unfinished Business is set in the areas of Lara's Tomb Raider 1 journey, they make use of the same enemies you find in Egypt and Atlantis. But it would be a gross understatement to say that they put in a suitable amount of them. There are a lot of enemies, sometimes a detrimentally absurd amount. Unfinished Business has 4 levels with a total number of about 155 kills to commit, while Tomb Raider 1's Egypt and Atlantis amount to 86 kills combined, spread across 6 levels. The next 2 expansions go just a little bit easier on the numbers, although there are select levels that still have a high density of enemy challenges in relatively quick succession. The Cold War, for example, is a challenge based mostly on the consistent use of mid-game enemies from Tomb Raider 2. And what the Golden Mask lacks in numbers compared to Unfinished Business, they make up for in the difficulty of introducing a healthy number of more annoying enemies. And when compared to the Tibet section of Tomb Raider 2, the Golden Mask beats it out in terms of enemy numbers, despite having levels that are arguably shorter. In reassessing the Lost Artifact, I found that while the combat is even more chill than the previous 2 expansions, it once again beats out the main game in terms of enemy density. The number of kills fluctuate around the same amount as in Tomb Raider 3, but since the levels are generally as long or shorter than the conventional Tomb Raider 3 level, they still feel like they're well inhabited.
There's so many enemies in this level, Phil. Why do you hate us so much?
Well, listen, Avalanche, they're very dangerous. We got some really great new toys to play with. The guys that climb up stuff were brand new, and that was the best.
You see that? That right there, that's not good. For those of you that don't know, that symbol is for Marco Bartoli. But these people are supposed to be a group called Avalanche. So the remaster's they're not being exactly faithful to the original goal, but you know, it's kind of whatever, I guess.
You ain't fast enough for him. Jackrabbit frog legs are...
Good pacing means you never have to stay in one area doing something for too long that isn't at least somewhat engaging. For example, going up this ladder twice for how long and uninteresting it is isn't great pacing. It's a necessary evil, but it's time you could have otherwise spent engaging with a puzzle or fighting a tough enemy. If you've played these games before, you'll generally know what moments aren't that well paced based on how brain dead you are while doing them. Repetition and stagnation in gameplay is what creates this feeling. So while that feeling of stagnation is often the result of the player's shortcomings whenever they're unable to get past a puzzle or area, if there's a case where the player is in fact smoothly getting through everything as intended and the game still feels like it's stagnating, then that's on the game. So I'm always happy to play the expansions, knowing that for the most part the pacing never really dips to a poor quality. The way forward is hardly ever begrudged by repetitive actions or belaboring puzzles that make you backtrack multiple times without so much as a shortcut. Block puzzles, for example, are mostly relegated to secrets, so they don't slow you down too much.
There's less of go there to pull a trigger to go to another room, to pull another trigger to go to another room to pick up the key to open the door in the first room.
I was looking through a filter of being more an architect, so I like the idea that you had a sense of foreshadowing, you had a sense of where you needed to go always.
When it comes to just feeling stagnated due to the variety that the levels present you with, there are some places in the classic Tomb Raider trilogy that do start to feel exhausting after being there for a while, and you kinda just wanna see new scenery. And I think the only expansion that may have a few instances that overstay their welcome are bits of Unfinished Business. In the Golden Mask in particular, once you're able to down the enemies in front of you, the path ahead is always pretty much clear, or at least easily found. Unfinished Business and the Lost Artifact take a bit more of the hub-based level design from their main games, but they're at least not as lengthy with travel time as any of the hubs like the Opera House, St. Francis Folly, or Aldwych, which, depending on who you ask, is kind of a good thing. The brevity of the expansions clearly lets them have the advantage in that regard. There's no need for filler or padding when you have so many ideas that can only fit into a slot of 4 to 6 levels. People may consider the length a major drawback of the expansions, but honestly, I embrace it as one of the positives in reality. Whenever you need a break from lengthy gaming experiences that demand a lot of time from you when you don't have all the time in the world to commit. The length is a part of why it's so perfect for when I want to experience classic Tomb Raider again.
Right, now I'd better take off these wet clothes.
What really influenced me was just the limitations of the game itself. You'd always try to push the limits and do the best that you could.
But Rebecca, I think you kind of nailed it. Art is all about limitations, right? The medium, the paint on the canvas, all those limitations make you be creative and doing something cooler.
And that saying is no doubt true for classic Tomb Raider. The resources available for game development were limited as a whole. But even with how limited the main team at Core Design were, they still had more to work with for their games than the expansions did, specifically concerning the narrative. While the main games had the luxury of at least a few voiced and FMV cutscenes to flesh out their story, the expansions wouldn't be so lucky. They instead make use of literally everything else at their disposal, and for this case, it was the in-game visuals. Everything from inserting text, drawings, and symbols onto the textures to completely repainting them to look like something completely different. With a limited amount of textures they had at their disposal, it really shows the dedication to storytelling whenever the team opted into making a new texture that would only appear once in the game to communicate part of the narrative. And if you're the type who enjoys the quiet rumination of a game's plotline, then the expansions could likely scratch that itch more than the main games. They even thought to leverage the loading screens as a firm piece of transparent storytelling. With each new expansion, you could gradually see how much more details and changes the devs could add. Of course, what's a texture without structures and models to place them on? The expansions do an excellent job of creating completely new kinds of environmental and architectural spaces for Lara to explore, distinct from the main games. Even in a game like Unfinished Business, whose levels are heavily based on sections of the main game, it still manages to stand out by putting Lara in totally original areas. It was mentioned that they strove to do more outside areas in the expansions, and as a massive fan of the outside in Tomb Raider games, I must say they definitely succeeded in that. These open spaces are the areas that really captivated me in terms of the beauty that Tomb Raider games could have. I have to say, I love what they've done. It's more realistic, but it really makes me miss the old school vibe of having really bright sand. It reminds me of games like Prince of Persia, even though in Prince of Persia you don't really come to places like these, but there's just something very video gamey about bright ground beneath a dark, starry lit sky, you know?
You can't do this.
Let's just do it.
Though few and far between, the expansions take different approaches to the conventions present in the main games. To start with, I gotta say, the expansion levels have some wild names. In the main games, level titles are fairly straightforward. Usually it's just the name of the location you're at, but the expansions take a slightly different approach. Unfinished Business is probably the most tame, but then we dive into the Golden Mask, where we start off with the Cold War, a reference to a literal period of time or event. Fool's Gold, a reference to either a faulty investment or literally worthless minerals. Then we have Nightmare in Vegas, Highland Fling, Sleeping with the Fishes, It's a Madhouse, you get the picture. But enough about naming conventions, let's mention some cool unique things that the expansions try to do, like forcing you to alert this guard so that he opens the door for you, picking up shotgun shells to open doors, or letting you drop the big birdman into the spike pit, or letting you drop this thug into this monk pit, dropping boulders to crack some ice whenever you pick up a medpack, dropping an invisible monk onto a lower level, or even having invisible monks in the first place. Ooh, look at the effects on this. Look at that. Oh, that's brilliant. That is brilliant. Wow. Invisible one-way walls that pop up behind you after you pass through them. Vehicles that aren't needed for anything other than being cool and violent. importing enemies from previous games that aren't even in the main game.
When we did this and we wanted to bring a Tomb Raider 1 asset, we wanted the bear. They had to go and reprogram that whole thing because they just couldn't get it to work.
We had like a request list of things we wanted, and I believe there was some music that you wanted to use too, and we didn't get it.
Starting a level with not only a music sting, but a completely separate camera angle, spawning enemies in locations that really make you go, that's not fair, having a random guy wanking in the bathroom, and the ominous sense of dread and foreboding you get when there is just a group of enemies frozen right in front of you, just waiting to pounce. These cat mummies spawn right in front of you, instantly. This happens so rarely in these games, and similar ones in the genre, that it's clearly considered to be a bit of a bad practice to do so. But here they are, just doing it. It looks kinda wacky, but you know what? I really like it. One thing that isn't as creative is the implementation of mandatory health loss for progression. I don't really approve of mandatory meds, but what I can approve of are optional meds for secrets. And that's exactly what Golden Mask and the Lost Artifact do for their early Uzi pickups. A fair trade in my opinion, and a great way to reward people who have enough spare meds or health to make the drop. One more thing that really shows the inherent creative approach to what's in these levels is the extra inclusion of optional keys or doors, particularly in the Lost Artifact. Similar to the Cathedral key in Tomb Raider 3, the Lost Artifact may have the player wondering why they picked up an extra crowbar or a gate key along the way. It's the way these instances make the player feel like they found some sort of optional quest within the level that really hits home. And it's something I wished was more present in every Tomb Raider game since. I don't think they've taken the opportunity to use more music, which is why it's pretty much silent and just the normal ambience for most of it, which is disappointing. I really wish the remaster would have taken into account the fact that they may have been limited with regard to music and added more.
I'm having some things put into storage and the delivery people haven't been yet.
A certifiable treat in the expansions. The secrets either take you on a whole journey off the beaten path, or are at least well hidden enough in close proximity to make you work for them. You'll want to get all of them as the rewards are usually worth it, not just in terms of pickups, but in terms of the visual treat. Many of them are a feast for the eyes, and some of them even have little backstories of their own. They can be tricky to get though, especially in the Lost Artifact, where paying attention to all the carefully crafted textures will actually help you to take the right steps to get them. Not to mention, the grandest ones aren't just accompanied by the usual secret chime, but oftentimes with soundtracks that may have otherwise been used for atmospheric or epic moments of the main path.
And you know, you're tunneling under the earth, you're down there. That's why the pterodactyl idea came up, that we were disturbing these ancient realms and you're taking a path through history.
I do kind of think that they phoned it in with the foliage in this level. I'm not necessarily expecting them to make all of this 3D, but after you see the foliage in Tomb Raider 1, this by comparison just seems a little bit like they ran out of time when they got to the expansions. It's what you deserve.
It's what she deserves.
Oh my god!
Probably my favorite aspect of the expansions is the high amounts of developer-to-player interaction. Those moments where you can clearly see how the level designers used event triggers at their disposal to non-verbally communicate to us, evoke certain emotions in us, or to just completely troll us. A lot of rooms and open areas in Tomb Raider are viewed from the perspective of the default camera angle behind Lara, and it can kind of downplay just how grand and purposeful certain level designs are. This is why those unique camera shots are so useful. The expansions make a point to have a lot more of these in an effort to get across the big picture of several areas. In a way, it shows a sense of pride in the design and how much the devs cared about how the player perceives it.
The thing about this stuff is you could always guarantee that people would hit that camera spot because you put a pickup, and that was our way of guiding people to look at the things that we wanted them to look at.
The other prevalent use of the camera is to show the functional effects of interactables like switches, but you'll find that there are a few extra uses of a rogue camera that the expansions tend to use quite a bit more than the main games. Oftentimes, a player will get an odd camera shot, one that neither shows them the result of something they've done, nor give the player a view of where they are, whether it's the implication that Lara is seeing the perspective of something else, or a curious area of interest as a hint. Sometimes the expansions are just trolling the player with a camera shot that's nothing more than a jump scare. And it's the consistency and insistence on doing these things more and more that keep the expansions at the forefront in showing their creativity. Oh my god. Guys, dude, we gotta get in there. There's gold over there. Holy shit. It's kinda weird, but it's beautiful. I can't believe they've done this. Wow.
I still got a pain in my brain from you.
Let's go off on some of the event triggers that would no doubt turn the heads of even the most experienced Tomb Raider players. Moments where you wish you could just have some choice words with the developers right then and there. These moments mostly speak for themselves, better than I ever could.
You unsavory little
You can just feel the life and enthusiasm flowing from the game devs translated into the player.
FBI, open up!
It's some of the most video gamey gameness, which ironically is trying to be a bit more cinematic with the dramaticness of it all. But since it's all in gameplay, it works so well.
Hey, how y'all doing?
You actively feel the designer placing a challenge before you and daring you to tackle it.
The designer is thinking, what's the player going to do next? What's she going to do? And then the designer responds to that. But then the player is also thinking, what would the designer... If I jump, oh my goodness, oh you made, oh bad luck.
So close.
And I always end up feeling underwhelmed whenever I go back to the main games, and most things happen without camera angles or crazy sound cues. Perhaps moments that I've attributed mainly to the expansions have a lot more instances in the main games than I'm giving them credit for. But I feel like the proof is in the pudding of me not even remembering them as vividly or fondly. Stupid! This dumb sub tackling Lara underwater is still one of the funniest things in Tomb Raider 3. It's just so fun and so memorable and so enthusiastic and not as bogged down by other game elements, and only get better with each entry. Okay, so this right here, this is bullshit. Period.
No, that's not right. Run back to the start and try again.
So, having finished all of the remastered expansions, I'm just gonna give a bit of a review as to how I thought it went. For the record, my least favorite expansion is, of course, Unfinished Business, being the first, being very experimental, and having such a limited scope for what to do with its levels. My nostalgic favorite is, of course, The Golden Mask, because that game really has some beautiful levels. My objective favorite would be The Lost Artifact for all the creative things that it does. When it comes to the remastered versions, there are some things I liked, but there were quite a few things I didn't like, as I'm sure we've already gone through. For the Unfinished Business visuals, they were all pretty much okay. For the outside Egypt areas, I do prefer the old style, which gives it a more video gamey 80s/90s aesthetic, but I also appreciate the gloomier night sky aesthetic, as it fits a darker, more relaxing mood sometimes. The giant cat statue was still beautiful, and the Atlantis levels were as expected. Very shiny, sometimes a bit too shiny, but just like in the main game, they were fine. For the Golden Mask, the levels that really stood out in the remasters were the Cold War and Furnace of the Gods. I really loved what they did with the textures in the Furnace, and I love the mood that they set with the sky in the Cold War. What I didn't like so much was that they kinda messed up on some of the textures for like the snowmobile, and honestly in Fool's Gold, the skybox in the original actually took my breath away a bit more than the remastered skybox. The colors in the original were just so much more vibrant and kind of sharp, whereas in the remasters it's a bit more subtle. There are some sunsets which are often like covered by light, thin scatterings of clouds that are really purple and red and vibrant, and the clouds really add harsh, extreme color to them that it just looks absolutely gorgeous. Whenever I think about amazing skyboxes in the original Tomb Raider games, the one at the end of Fool's Gold always stands out to me as being one of the most beautiful. I was also somewhat disappointed that the liquid gold in Kingdom wasn't as beautiful as it was in Furnace of the Gods. It wasn't as extreme. And of course, the foliage in Kingdom wasn't that great either, especially when compared to the foliage you get in the remastered visuals of Tomb Raider 1 or Tomb Raider 3. For the Lost Artifact, I'm not necessarily sure, but I feel like it really didn't look that much better than the old game did. The Scotland levels didn't impress me at all. The lighting really kind of obscured the Nessie jump scare, which was also disappointing. Sometimes you could barely see Nessie from a distance. Although inside of Nessie was really cool. I loved the lighting inside of the mechanical Nessie robot. The open, grassy, flowery field where the Highlanders show up, it was okay, but I think they could have done more with that. Somehow I feel like when it came down to the wire, they really didn't have a lot of time to do much with the expansions, or they just didn't focus on them as much, because I don't think there's any other explanation as to why they would leave that forested area so flat unless they were pressed for time. Oh, and the only other area in the Lost Artifact that I really enjoyed the upgrade for is the zoo area, this little sitting area outside in the open. It was really nice. I love the way the lights like create this relaxing atmosphere for the people who might come here to sit and relax, although when there's wild tigers roaming about, they really shouldn't be. But overall, impressive in some places, disappointing in others. So I'd say this is a bit of a standard meh remaster for me, at least in terms of the expansions. I'm pretty sure the main games are actually like getting a better glow up than these are, so. So those were all the reasons I love the expansions so much. I love the main games too, but there's just something about the expansions that really have me rooting for them, especially since most people never really had a chance to play them. They were definitely made with a lot of heart, and I'm hoping that that can still shine through in the remasters.
Not as many people were seeing Golden Mask, and certainly not as many people were seeing Lost Artifact, but in a way it just didn't matter to us. It was getting the job, getting the agreement, discussing the levels, proposing to them what we wanted to do. It was a very reactive thing. And the beauty of it was that we didn't have to crazily pitch or fight that hard. They just knew that these guys could put a game together in 3 months.
I'm beyond elated that more people can experience them now. For those of you who will be looking to share your individual experiences with the remastered expansions, you can bet that I'll be checking them out. Thanks to all the creators featured in this video, especially Tomb of Ash for having hosted his streams, and especially the team that worked on the expansions. Lastly, thank you all so much for watching. I hope that hearing me gush about the expansions, you either got some clarity as to why they might feel different for you, or just found some validation in your own feelings about them. Or perhaps you disagree. Maybe you think the main games are just as creative, or even more so. you can leave those thoughts in the comments as well. Also, feel free to leave a like or a dislike as it suits your experience watching this video. Anyway, that's it. Bye.